I am mostly confident that the Cincinnati Reds are going to handle the St. Louis Cardinals in 2025.
You are Locked On Reds, your daily Cincinnati Reds podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Reds. My name is Jeff Carr, and I am a lifelong Cincinnati Reds fan. This is now my 7th season hosting the Locked On Reds podcast that is brought to you by the Locked On Podcast Network. We are your team every single day. And on today's podcast, we got a special edition of the podcast as JD Hafron from Locked On Cardinals will join me, and we'll discuss the Reds and the Cardinals heading into 2025. We'll look at why I believe the Cardinals look like a last place team. The Cardinals look like they're just going to lose a lot this season. We're going to discuss that to begin today's show. We'll also look at why the Reds are just too hard for projection systems to nail down. And later on, we'll discuss a lot of fun crossovers of players that played with the Reds and the Cardinals. And there's one guy in particular that I'm looking back at that he surprised me, looking back through the history of the Reds and the Cardinals. That's all coming up on today's Locked On Reds podcast. Really appreciate you joining us here today. Let's get into it.
I first want to get your thoughts, Jeff, as an outsider, as a competitor against the Cardinals, someone who doesn't see things through the Cardinals' rosy Cardinal red glasses like I do, somebody who can be completely honest with themselves. What did you make of what the Cardinals did or didn't do this offseason in regards to letting a guy like Paul Goldschmidt walk and sign with the Yankees and trying to trade Nolan Arenado and then having it not happen, and just the overall direction of the team from your point of view? What have you seen? What have you noticed?
They're rebuilding, right? No, I'm just kidding. I don't know. Based on what I've seen, I feel like all they did was take a step back. And now there might be some young guys that really step up, but I just didn't see what I thought I was going to see from Jordan Walker last year. And there really wasn't that big breakout for Liberatore. And I know that he pitched out of the bullpen a lot and things like that too, that I was worried about a couple of years ago. Things like that just did not pan out the way I thought they would. I mean, as much as I dislike the Cardinals, I respect the heck out of how they run their organization. And for years and years and years, it was, all right, this guy's leaving, but we got another guy to back him up. I don't see that right now with what the roster has. And I know there's going to be some folks that are just like, oh man, the hater rate is strong with this guy, but I think they finish last in 2025, unless a lot of lightning gets caught in a bottle that we're just not seeing right now.
Yeah, I mean that's and honestly, they're not going to call you haters. The Cardinal fans, they're as upset about things as anybody. You know, they're the ones that are like, you know, what is this? Like, what are we trying to do? And when you mentioned something about, you know, rebuilding, the word that our president of baseball operations, John Mozeliak, used at the beginning of the year, or at least in the offseason, was reset. It didn't really pan out the way they wanted it to, because the idea, at least in our eyes, was that they were going to move on from veterans with bigger contracts. So Nolan Arenado made a lot of sense. Trading him, trading Wilson Contreras, trading Sonny Gray, trading Ryan Helsley, who we thought would have some trade value coming off as the NL closer of the year, and he's set to become a free agent at the end of this year. And none of that happened. Nobody got traded. They basically just let people who were making a decent chunk of change that were going to be free agents, they just let them walk. So guys like Kyle Gibson, Lance Lynn, Paul Goldschmidt, obviously the headliner there, Andrew Kittredge, guys who, you know, were a big part of the 83-win team last year. They just chose not to re-sign them, and instead of re-signing people, are just kind of promoting from within. Is really so what you're, you know, the reason why you're like, yeah, I don't really see how you filled any of these holes is because most people aren't familiar with these guys unless you're like a diehard Cardinals fans. You wouldn't know guys like Michael McGreevy or Andre Palante or any of these names, which is why I can see the outlook being as negative as it is from anybody who's not in St. Louis. But trust me when I tell you, there's negativity in St. Louis right now. People are upset that, you know, this franchise, which makes a decent chunk of change, usually until last year sells 3 million tickets, isn't going for it and not going all in. So it's a tough pill to swallow for these guys. Something similar for you guys, where it seems like for a few years in a row, it's kind of like we think we're there and then we're not there. And you guys have been kind of in this reset, rebuild kind of cycle for a couple of years now.
Right. And especially hiring a new manager, you would tend to believe that, okay, the clock is just now beginning and maybe like in a year or two they're going to be back there. But I think that we all believe that with the talent that Terry Francona has to work with, they should be able to compete for the playoffs this year.
Yeah.
And a lot of that's yeah, and we'll get into that, but I kind of wanted to circle back. I mean, you mentioned Palante. He's like a four-letter word in my household whenever he pitches. I don't get it. The Reds can't hit him. Whatever he does, there's some sort of magic that he puts on the ball, and they just hit ground balls 100 million times every time he's on the mound. And I think that's probably where I am still a little bit reticent to completely back my feeling that they're not going to be a contender in the division, is just because, is a guy like Tink Hence going to be up, and is he going to go crazy? What are those young pitchers that they're really looking for? Because I know that the Cardinals farm system is very similar to the Reds in that the top half of their farm system is pitching, pitching, pitching. And we all know that if you can pitch, you can beat most teams. I don't care if you're the Dodgers, the Mets, or whoever. Like, if you are able to limit the other lineup, then you can get some wins. So what are those young pitchers going to be for that? That's kind of how I look at the Cardinals from the outside looking in. Like, I feel like there's blood in the water a little bit as a Reds fan, but
Sure.
there's still always that feeling that there's somebody going to show up out of AAA Memphis, is it? I just think
look
is
at
going
you.
to it's going to improve. Hey, man, when you hate the Cardinals as much as I hate the Cardinals, you tend to learn to a little bit of information about it.
It's similar words that we heard from Chuck Freeman over at Locked On Brewers, where he's like, yeah, you guys don't appear like you're going to be good, but you guys are the stupid Cardinals, and you guys always figure something out, and some random dude shows up and does good and makes you feel better, and you guys are better than you should be. And it's been that way for a while, and the well has dried up a little bit, which is why you haven't seen the Cardinals take those next steps, which is something that they have worked on significantly this offseason, and something they're hoping to do with Chaim Bloom coming in and taking over next year, is to really work on player development so they don't get into this rut again where they're overpaying for veterans to fill holes and they don't really make all that much of a difference. They're just costing a lot more money. Instead, you want to be able to bring guys up, like the Reds have been able to, where you've seen a lot of success from the younger guys, specifically not last year, but the previous year, when you saw Elly and Matt McLain and these guys come up and do really, really good and do these great things for them, and give them a lot of hope. Last year was tough because of the injuries, but in your opinion, real quick, before we move on to the Reds, what's the weakest link for the Cardinals on this current roster? Do you think it's rotation, or is it everyday players you see holes in their like lineup 1 through 9? Because offense was a big problem last year, but they've had a little turnover in the starting rotation as well. What do you think is their biggest problem right now?
Yeah, I think my point of view, I think scoring runs is going to be their biggest issue. And I mean, they've got Helsley on the back end, so the bullpen's not ever going to be that big of a problem. Like, outside of Helsley, I'm not sure who's sticking out to me, but yeah, the lineup for me, like Wilson Contreras is kind of it. And other than that, I don't see a guy like Nolan Arenado every so often is going to get you, but he has gotten to the point in his career where Joey Votto was, where it's like, it's going to be a little bit fewer and far between. The consistency is just not quite there anymore. So I think that scoring runs is going to be their biggest issue this season. Projection systems, they just can't handle the truth when it comes to the Cincinnati Reds roster. I'll tell you why coming up next. Make sure you're subscribed to Locked On Reds. We've got all kinds of Reds content coming for you all throughout spring training as we get ready for opening day. Really excited for Reds baseball, man, and we're going to be with you every single day. All right, let's jump back into my conversation with JD Hafron. We're going to talk about why projection systems just don't have a clue when it comes to the Cincinnati Reds.
We're getting closer to opening day. We're only 20 some odd days away from things beginning, which in St. Louis is very much a holiday around the city. I'm familiar that it is also the same way for Reds opening day. How excited is the city for what's about to take place? Who do you guys open up with this year? Do you guys get somebody actually in the National League? Because we get the Twins.
Yeah, we got the Giants coming in, so not a divisional opener. It feels like we've opened with the Pirates for like every opening day for like the last 6 years. But yeah, I got the Giants coming into town. Everybody's stoked. I mean, watching the way that spring training has started off for a lot of these guys, for Elly, for McLain, for CES, like everything is just popping right now. And hopefully that continues. And hopefully we continue to get positive health updates on everyone. And currently right now, Spencer Steer is really the only guy we're worried about. And hopefully that continues.
Pacoda projections, which we always say is not the be all end all, but it's something that people like to, talk about before the actual regular season begins. They've got the Reds projected at 73.9 wins and finishing in last place in this division. Now, if you go around, MLB circles and you listen to people talk about, I don't know anybody else who's picking the Reds to finish last. I don't hear that very often. I find it strange that Pacoda's got it that way. Why would they do that? Like, why do you think that they would have the Reds at such a low win total? And why is this absurd in the eyes of almost everybody else around the league?
I think the hardest part about the Reds is that they're very difficult to project because of their young roster. There's not a lot in the back of the baseball card way. Like, I mean, Elly Cruz last year was a 6 WAR guy according to Fangraphs. He was just below 6 WAR according to Baseball Reference. And there's still a lot about his game that could improve, right? I mean, he led the league in caught stealing, he led the league in errors, and he led the league in strikeouts. And so there's a lot about his game that could still get better. And there's a lot of folks that wonder whether or not that's going to happen. Matt McLain didn't play at all last year. What are we going to see? Are we going to see the guy that was showing up in 2023, albeit not in a full season, and really impressing with what he did? Or are injuries going to keep him off the field? Same for TJ Friedl, for CES. There's a lot of guys that the Reds are leaning on that just don't have a resume. So projection systems are going to be hard pressed to just say that this team is going to be better. Now, here's the thing. All those guys are healthy. And with them being healthy, the roster is better than where they were last year. And the pitching staff has gotten better. The starting pitching staff especially has gotten more deep, I think. And then the bullpen itself has also gotten deeper. So I tend to believe that where they were last year, and then you add in the fact, because I haven't even mentioned his name yet when it comes to why the Reds are better, Terry Francona, who's going to at least add 5 wins in my opinion. This team's already gotten better than where they were last year. And so how does everything else play out? You do need a lot of bounce backs and you do need a lot of breakouts, but I tend to believe that more of those are going to happen than not.
You mentioned Terry Francona. Tito, as he's well known around the league, steps in after taking a year off. Obviously, you're familiar with him in Ohio because of his time with Cleveland. What is it about Tito that's got the fans buzzing? Obviously, he's a very good manager. Almost every year he comes away with a winning record, which obviously is a positive. But the difference between him and your former manager, David Bell, how has that changed things in your clubhouse?
It just seems like Tito gets it, right? Like I think there's this unspoken understanding of the game and how to get the best out of his players that we just never felt from David Bell. Like I think a lot of the answers that David Bell would give to questions were, yeah, we're going to go out there and compete. We're going to go out there and give her all. We're going to go out there and play the best baseball we can do. And from day one, they asked Terry Francona, what's the goal? He's like, we're going to go out there and we're going to beat somebody's ass. Mm-hmm. And I was like, let's go. Like, that's the best way to introduce yourself. And I mean, obviously he's got the resume of guys like Jose Ramirez and Dustin Pedroia and Manny Ramirez and all the different players that he has managed and kind of taken from one level to the next level. He's going to do that with the talent that he has in Cincinnati. And I feel like he understands exactly how to find that key area that he needs to put the pressure on, that he needs to take the pressure off, that he needs to communicate more with. And while there's a lot of Reds fans in Reds country that almost expect him to be at the top step whenever somebody gets picked off and just being standing there and just like, tapping his foot, looking like he's going to get on somebody, That's not going to be how this goes, but there's going to be an understanding in the back of their mind. I don't know why I just tapped the back of my head when I said that, but there's going to be an understanding in the back of their mind.
Are you challenging
I'm
the call?
challenging the pitch there. But there's going to be an understanding, an unspoken understanding that these players have of what they are supposed to do out on the field that I don't think David Bell had for them over the last 5 years.
And yeah, that's the thing is they hung on to Bell for quite some time, and they kept kind of repeating that he wasn't the problem. It's just getting people healthy, doing the same stuff that you normally hear from any team that struggles. In a similar case, Ollie Marmol comes in and he wins in that first year when he's got the big three still on the squad when it's Waino and it's Molina and Pujols comes back and goes crazy in the second half. And then everything comes crashing down in that second year. And then last year was better. And this year, it seems like we're getting a little bit more of a personality out of Ollie, which I think has been refreshing for Cardinals fans. Are kind of like, oh my God, so he actually is a good guy? Because it seemed like he was very like, well, this is business and we're working and we're trying to do this. Very kind of like what you're saying about David Bell, where Terry is a little more, Tito is a little more open and is a little more, personality-wise, he shows it more. Instead of hiding it in the clubhouse for his players, he's doing it wherever, he's the same guy that you see on camera as he is in the clubhouse, which can make a world of difference because when your clubhouse is tight and it's stale and nobody's having fun, there's not a lot of winning going on normally in those situations. What are some of the biggest positives that you've seen so far this spring from your Reds? Just looking at stat-wise, obviously Elly is having a monster beginning to spring training. Who else has been standing out for you guys so far with Cincinnati?
Definitely Elly. I mean, he's hitting over 500. Not to the point that I'm thinking like, yeah, that's what he's going to be in the regular season, but mechanically he looks really, really good. He's changed his swing just a little bit, slide step instead of a big step forward every time he goes to swing. And I think that there's a lot about his game that's going to translate to the regular season, and he's looking more patient at the plate. And I think that that is the key. Like there was an at bat, and I talked about this on my show today, but there was an at bat against the Cubs the other day where he took 5 straight pitches and got a walk. And I don't know that he did that at all last year. Like I cannot recall a situation where he took 5 pitches, never swung at one. But then outside of him, like Matt McLain looks healthy, and that's really all I needed from him. But he's also played pretty well too. He's hitting the extra base hits, taking the extra bases, playing well in the field. That middle infield combo is just going to be so good for the Reds. And that's the reason why I'm so bullish, and albeit, I'll admit it, a little homerish when it comes to the Pacoda projections and saying that they're going to be so wrong. But having him back, I mean, people forget 2023, there were and I made this case too, most people thought Matt McLain had the better year than Elly De La Cruz did in 2023. And then not having him at all last year was such a huge blow to this roster that I think we're going to see just how good this team can be now that he is back. And outside of him, the other guy that I'm at least raising my eyebrow by, not a guy that I think is going to make the opening day roster, but a guy that is starting to prove that I think he can fix his game, is Will Benson. He was awful last year. There's no way about it. I mean, no two ways about it. He had a negative 1.8 WAR. He was detrimental when he was on the field. And now he has fixed his swing a little bit more compact, quicker to the ball, which was his biggest area of concern, is that not that he swung at bad pitches. He was good at laying off of pitches outside the zone, but pitches that he swung at inside the zone, his contact rate was much lower than league average. So he definitely had to fix that part of his game. I think he's taken the right step there. He's going to start the year in AAA, but he could be back up by summertime, and hopefully we'll see him mashing right-handed pitchers here pretty soon.
Yeah, it's something that both teams kind of have a similar thing going on, where there's kind of an abundance of solid left-handed hitting outfielders for you guys and the Cardinals. And then there's a shortage of right-handed guys, where the Cardinals got Jordan Walker and nobody. That's it. That's all they got is a right-handed hitter for the outfield this year. You guys were able to bring in a guy by Austin Hayes. He was a guy that, Cardinal fans kind of were like, well, he'd be an interesting guy. So he might see some steady time for you guys, maybe in left field or something. But your outfield is something that, you guys, it's going to be a work in progress, but you got a guy by the name of Tito who's pretty good at doing that stuff. So what is your biggest concern for the team real quick?
I think Right now, it's because we've still seen, and it's still spring training, so they're probably working it out, but we've still seen the base running blunders that really ailed them last year. A lot of pickoffs and things like that. There were some cases where you're like, was that a balk? Was it not a balk? But still seeing some base running blunders for the Reds here in spring training. I'm not super concerned about it. I've seen a lot of fans that are just like, oh my gosh, same old team. They're going to be just as bad as they were last year on the bases. I'm like, hold on now, man. They're just getting their legs underneath of them here in spring training. But it's definitely something that I want to see disappear here pretty soon because, I mean, all throughout the year last year, I mean, there was a play in the final game of the season where Noelvi Marte got picked off trying to steal second, and he tried to go too early, tried to time the pitch, and he couldn't time it right and gets picked off. And I'm like, that happened in game one, and it happened in game 162. Can't happen this year. I think we'll see it early on, but they'll get rid of it pretty soon with Tito manning the ship. There have been a ton of players over their careers that have spent time as a Cincinnati Red and a St. Louis Cardinal, including a couple of surprising guys. And I'm going to go back to a bygone era when the Reds won the World Series. There's a guy who won a World Series for both the Cardinals and the Reds way back in the day. You've got to reach for a bag of wonderful pistachios, just like the one that I got right here. Chili roasted. This is just a great example of one of the flavors that they've got. We're talking about some really healthy snacks that have amazing protein numbers. If you're one of those folks that really loves to pack the protein, Wonderful Pistachios has you covered. But they've also got these great flavors. Chili roasted is just one of them. They've got salt and vinegar. They've got all kinds of great flavors for you to fill that snack need in your life, but get that flavor that you deserve. Wonderful Pistachios is my favorite snack. I'm reaching for it a lot more than I'm reaching for chips anymore. Every day there's I love me a bag of chips, but I love a bag of Wonderful Pistachios even more. You got to check them out. Get snacking and get cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch, and head on over to wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more today. It's become my favorite snack. Can't wait to chow down on some whenever the baseball games get started here in about 3 weeks, and you should go stock up as well. That's Wonderful Pistachios.
A lot of history between our two franchises and a lot of guys who have played on both sides of this rivalry. So we want to go through some of the names that have donned both of these jerseys. There's been a lot of them recently that stand out to me, but there's some other older names that we're going to bring up that you might remember. Now, who, off the top of your head, Jeff, who was the first one that came to mind when you think somebody who played for both teams?
It's so random, but the first guy that always comes to mind when I think Cardinal and Red is Skip Schumaker. And it was the guy that I thought was going to be the Reds manager, because whenever the Marlins let him go, I thought the Reds were going to hire him. I was surprised when they got Terry Francona to be. He was like on my radar, but it was like, nah, no way, the Reds aren't going to get him. But I thought Skip was going to be the next Skip for the Reds, and that's one of the first guys that always comes to mind.
Yeah, he's a good one. I'm going to throw this one at you because most people forget that he played for the Cardinals, because the main part of his career that was really good was with Cincinnati. Eric Davis is a guy that did both. Went to the Dodgers and obviously with the Orioles at one point as well, Tigers. But Eric Davis played a couple of seasons with the Cardinals, and that was a guy that, if he had ever gotten to stay healthy, we just don't know how good that guy could have been. But you saw for a few years there, like he was an absolute beast for the Cincinnati Reds, one of the leaders of that 1990 World Series team. How about this one? Let's stick with it, because a lot of these guys are good outfielders. Jimmy Edmonds. Jimmy Edmonds was a Cincinnati. He played, I think, except for the Pirates, he played for every team in the NL Central.
I think every Reds fan would like to forget his tenure as a Red.
So you're telling me he didn't have a great Reds career, although he actually ended his career with you guys, home run in his last at bat, hits a home run. And for those who aren't familiar, actually got injured coming around the bases. And so that was the end of his career, hurt his Achilles. And that put an end to his career. He will not be in the booth this year for the Cardinals, Jeff. He's actually, they did not ask him back. So that was some drama for Cardinals fans. A couple of other center fielders, Harrison Bader was with you guys for a cup of coffee. Michael Ciani, who played himself into a starting role last year due to injuries, former Reds prospect, came over to the Cardinals. When I say Jason LaRue, what do you think of, Jeff?
It's funny because I always liked him as a Reds catcher, but it's because of that fight in 2010. Like,
There
that's
you
what I
go.
think about.
Yes, his career getting ended due to a concussion during that massive brawl that was started. I'll say to this day, who do you blame in that one? Do you blame Brandon
Oh, it's
Phillips
Brandon
more than
Phillips. It's
Yachty,
Brandon
or is it
Phillips.
the other way around?
So it was Brandon Phillips loved to stir the pot when he was a player, and he knew like his comments because he made comment. I forget exactly what he said, but he made some comments
He
to
called us the B
reporters.
word, Jeff. If that's what, if you don't remember, I don't know if I can
I mean,
say it on this show, but I won't. But he called us female dogs.
of course, Yachty's gonna take exception with that. And look, I don't have the highest opinion of Yachty, and I know I'm not in good company to make that sort of a statement. But I also believe that Brandon Phillips started that fight.
Yeah, it's one of those guys on both sides where if Brandon Phillips was on my team, I would have loved him, but because he was on the opposition, you hated his guts. And same way for everybody when it comes to Molina. If he's on you, he's wearing your uniform, you're a big fan. How about some other old school ones? I got a Ron Gant for you. I got a Reggie Sanders for you. Ryan Ludwig, who actually was pretty good with the Reds after he left the Cardinals.
As well.
Here's a big one for you. Hall of Famer just recently went. Scott Rowland, who was also a part of that brawl that we're talking about. But gosh, I hated seeing him leave St. Louis. And he just didn't get along with La Russa, and so they ship him to Toronto, and he ends up in Cincinnati. And you guys loved having him as a member of the Reds for a couple years.
I forgot exactly what the reasoning was, but I remember when the Cardinals sent him to Toronto, there were reports that the Reds were looking into getting him. I think that they just couldn't come to terms and they didn't want to make an in-division trade. But like, I think Roland wanted to come to Cincinnati then, and they just couldn't get the deal done. But yeah, I mean, he was kind of the signal that the Reds were ready to compete again back in 2010. And so that was kind of like the moment where it's like, all right, we're back, baby, let's go. And so there's a lot of fond memories of Scott Rowland. Not his best years of his career were spent in Cincinnati by any stretch, but it was a lot of the off the baseball card stuff that he did that a lot of people loved.
Yeah, that shoulder injury really zapped the power that you saw from Roland, but you knew he was a gamer and you knew he was money down there at the hot corner. So, yeah, he was a solid ball player for both sides. We'll throw a couple other ones at you. Dimitri Young started with the Cardinals before making his name with the Reds. Mike Leake has shared both of our uniforms. Edgar Renteria is one that most people will forget that actually was a Red for a heartbeat. Made his name with the Cardinals and the Marlins for the big parts of his career. Actually up to get into the Cardinals Hall of Fame this year. He's the guy I'm voting for. People will forget that Lee Smith was a Cincinnati Red. I had no idea until I saw his name on the list. Do you remember the Lee Smith era of Cincinnati Reds baseball?
Not quite.
Know.
But I will surprise you with one, not a Lee Smith type. And I go back because I love to go back in Reds history. And this guy was part of one of my favorite teams to read about and go back. I mean, obviously, I'm not old enough to remember this, but a member of the 1940 World Series Reds and a guy that finished fourth that year in MVP voting, Paul Derringer. Amazing pitcher. He was a guy that, like, all right, so just for example, the year that the Reds won the World Series, he made 37 starts. 26 of those starts were complete games. He had a rubber arm.
That's not bad.
He debuted as a St. Louis Cardinal. 1931, the World Series team for the Cardinals in 1931. Yeah. He was one of the best players on that team. He was a 3.6 WAR guy that year. His very first year ever in Major League Baseball, and the Cardinals handed him the ball for 23 starts and 35 games total.
Yeah, you don't see that kind of production anymore in this game of baseball, Jeff.
No, it's funny to like look back at old pitching stats, like of starting pitchers back then. Because, like, I mean, you and I were talking about this before we hit record. Like that year, he had 35 games pitched, 23 starts, the 1931 season for the Cardinals, 23 games started, 10 games finished. So he came in as a relief pitcher and finished 10 games, and he had 15 complete games. We're talking about a dude that like pitched 9 innings one day, then a couple of days later, we need you in the 7th, come on in. And yeah, he pitched relief too, like just a different game back then.
Yeah, bullpens did not exist really. There was like 8 or 9 dudes that could actually throw strikes, and those were the dudes who came in from wherever they were playing in the field, and we're also we're coming in those games. How about this name for you? I got one for you that nobody is going to remember because it just was a cool name. Played with the Reds. This is in the late 1800s. You ready for this one? Icebox Chamberlain. Let's go.
Yes.
Let's go.
Icebox. The names were so epic back then.
They need to be more fun like this again. But Icebox Chamberlain, just dominating back in the day. 25 wins in 1888. How about that? 32 wins for the Cardinals in 1889.
And that was when they pitched like every other day. Like they would, I remember like a story of Noodles Hahn, one of like the all-time greats Reds from like back in the early 1900s. Like stories of him, he would come to the ballpark and he would begin like tossing from like me to you. And then all of a sudden, by the time everybody was there, everybody showed up to the ballpark. He was like throwing it in from center field, just getting his arm loose, ready to go. Like he was just, he was called Noodles for a reason.
Right there.
Yeah.
All right, quickly, some other names. Jonathan Broxton, Jeff Brantley, the Cowboy, Royce Clayton, Vince Coleman. Most people won't remember that he was a Red. Juan Encarnacion, who got his eye socket shattered as a Cardinal, ended his career. Lefty Danny Jackson, Kyle Loesch, Tommy Pham, who has been on our teams recently. Terry Pendleton, most people will not remember he was a Red to finish his career. Chris Sabo, most people won't remember he was a Cardinal to end his career. I actually got to handle his baseball bat. I was in the clubhouse after a game the one year that he actually played for the Cardinals. Got lucky enough to get invited back there, and I was like, look at this. I got a Chris Sabo bat. Only thought of him as a Cincinnati Red in that wonderful year for you guys in 1990. Arthur Rhodes played for both of us, the lefty.
Yes.
I've actually been smacked on the butt by Arthur Rhodes once at a bar. That's a true story.
Nice.
And then who can forget Ted Power, who's just got one of the great names in all of baseball history, was also a member of the Reds and Cardinals. If there's anybody we forgot, let us know in the comments section down below. But a lot of great history between our two teams.
Locked On has you covered all throughout the baseball season with literally every baseball team out there. If you want to scout the enemy like the Cardinals or the Cubs or the Brewers or the Pirates or whoever, go to the Dodgers, you check out the Yankees, the Astros. We've got a Locked On podcast for you to get ready for every opponent that the Cincinnati Reds will face all year long. We're going to be talking with a lot of those folks along the way too, because we are the Locked On podcast and we're your team every single day. Shout out to our everydayers making us a part of your day. Again, making us your first listen every single day. If you're not an everydayer, hit that subscribe button, become an everydayer. I would really appreciate that if you did. Also, make sure you drop us a comment down in the YouTube comment section and drop us a review on your favorite podcasting app as well. That helps get us in front of more folks as we get ready for some baseball season. It's going to be a fun year, man. I cannot wait for some Reds baseball to get started. We're like 3 weeks away, and depending on when you're listening to this, it might be less than 3 weeks away from opening day. It's almost here. Man, this year's flying by. Absolutely flying by. But I'll tell you what, coming up on the next podcast, going to look at a couple of the further down the line roster spots and what do those look like, especially with a perceived injury. There's been no updates yet, but a perceived injury list appointment for Spencer Steer. What does that last bench spot look like for the Reds? We're going to discuss that on tomorrow's Locked On Reds podcast. Hope you join us. Till then, we're going to be Locked On Reds every single day.